If you have a trip abroad coming up and you're wondering how you can quickly learn enough of the local language to survive from the moment that you touch down, well, I have 10 language tricks in this video that are really going to help you, because let's face it, who wants to be this guy?
Bonjour, madame. Oh, gracias.
My name is Olly Richards. I speak 8 languages. I've lived in 10 different countries. I've traveled a lot. I've even written language learning books that have sold over 1 million copies. So I've picked up a few tips along the way for picking up languages quickly. Let's see. Now, textbooks can be treated as kind of old, traditional and outdated, but a textbook like this here from Teach Yourself that's designed for travelers can be really, really great for absolute beginners, since someone has basically gone to the trouble of putting together all the most basic, useful words and phrases. I'm not talking about detailed grammar books here. This is like a daily conversation, daily life beginner's textbook. You see them everywhere. This is not an in-depth study course either. It's like, treat this as a quick fix. You're probably traveling soon, maybe in a few weeks. You haven't got time to learn the whole language, so don't try. That's going to take you a lot longer. What you're looking to do here is learn what you're likely to come across in daily interactions. And you can predict what that stuff's going to be. Hello, how are you? Can I see the cocktail list, please? That's one of my personal, most used lines. So here's what you do. You go through your textbook, whatever you get, and you just pick out useful stuff, things that you think you're going to find yourself doing, highlight them, learn them. If it's got audio, listen to the audio. What phrases are useful? I want you to just really engage with it. Don't just be a passive learner. Think about, from the book, what situations are you likely to be in, and then spend a bit of time with them. Read them from the book, try and commit them to memory. We're not trying to learn everything, we're trying to be selective. So imagine yourself there on the ground. What are you likely to do? What are you likely to be saying? Are you going to be taking taxis? If so, learn the taxi dialogue from the textbook. Most textbooks have got these very practical situations that people actually need. So if you're going to be there, then think about what you're going to use and learn them in advance. It can also be very handy for travel to actually just look for a list of common travel phrases and learn some of those too. We have tons of these lists on our blog over at StoryLearning, so looking through those and picking a few ones to start with can be really good. There's a link in the description to these lists of phrases in lots of different languages.
All right, we need a word for symmetrical. Symmetrical. La symétrie. All right, la symétrie. And now I need a word for asymmetrical. La symétrie. No, Frank, you literally just said the same thing twice. Universal, please, just listen, okay? It's not the same thing at all, okay? You just have to listen. La symétrie. La symétrie.
Now, this is really important. So many people are so focused on what they want to say when they get to the country, they forget that actually they need to understand what people say back to them too. Otherwise, you end up in this rabbit in the headlights situation. Whatever you say, there's going to be a reply, and so you've got to focus, I would say, more on the listening side than actually on the speaking side. But you can predict what that's going to be. Every time you buy something, is that cash or card? You're asking for directions. It's this way. It's that way. It's very easy to predict what you're going to hear on a regular basis. And so focusing on understanding that, understanding what you're going to hear, is going to give you a lot of confidence. Best place to start, again, if you've got your textbook, just use the audio that comes with this. Just practice listening to the dialogues over and over until you start to just get used to the common words and phrases that come up. Questions and responses. If you can find audio from the exact region you're going to, that can be quite good, because if you're traveling to Latin America, for example, the Spanish from Guatemala is quite different to the Spanish from Argentina. So it can be useful not to just try and learn the whole dialect, but just to get your ears used to the sounds of the language, because when we speak, we do use lots of contractions, slang, lazy speech.
Don't say, hazme un favor. Say, hazme un fa.
So if you're traveling to Argentina, for example, look for a travel vlogger or an Argentine teacher. Just watch them, imitate them. Look on Wiki Tongues, for example, great website. You can hear ordinary people just describing themselves, and they often come with a little transcript as well. The whole idea is just to hear how the language flows in real life.
In everyday French, you will more often hear ouais than oui to say yes. Ouais is the lazier way to say oui. It's like in English the difference between yes and yeah.
Definitely true. And just knowing little things like this make a really, really big difference. And you want to hear them speaking fast too. Some of the things I'm going to tell you here are going to be useless if you're used to hearing words that are slowed down to half speed, because nobody is going to speak in slow motion for you, I am afraid. By the way, if you're learning Spanish to travel to Spain or Latin America, maybe you've tried learning Spanish before, hasn't gone so well. Some of my students tell me they've been learning Spanish for 5, 10, even 15 or more years without success before they discovered StoryLearning. And StoryLearning is the method that we teach here. StoryLearning is what you do when you've tried everything else and you're finally ready to learn, and you can try out the method with our 10-day Spanish challenge. Just 10 days, it takes 10 minutes a day. You will get to experience the story learning method and how it can help you with your Spanish. There's a link in the description if you'd like to check it out, but if you're traveling to Spain or South America, that's definitely worth a look. Now, where were we? So you've taken care of the understanding part as best you can with a few weeks' notice anyway. So what comes next? Well, here's the thing. When you travel, there are certain very predictable things that you can prepare for because you know yourself, you know what you're likely to actually do when you travel. So you have the opportunity now to memorize specific things that you will probably want to say. If you want to order a beer at a bar, for example.
A beer this size, small size, it's a caña. So,
Caña.
una caña, por favor.
Una caña, por favor. And look, you can ask for una cerveza, por favor, but you're going to sound a little more local if you ask for una caña, por favor.
This is where you double down on all those highlighted lines in your phrase book. Remember that? You're choosing very specific lines that work for you and you're going to memorize them. And there's no reason not to make your own list of useful personalized phrases from other sources as well. YouTube channels of people teaching languages can be a great resource. So, for example, let's say you are allergic to something.
So you have the two words, onion, alergi. To put them together for the whole phrase, you say, onion, alergi ga arimasu.
Definitely want to memorize that one. And then make yourself some little flashcards to practice with. Use whatever method works for you. The Anki app, homemade flashcards. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be complicated as long as you understand. That's part one. Part two is when you arrive at your destination. Now, you want to immerse yourself fully because this can be the beginning of your best learning. Just think about it. Just about everything you see in the new country is going to be written in this language. Maybe you'll see a bit of English here and there, but most text that you see will be in the local language. But here's a little strategy for you. First, make it a habit to try and read every bit of text that you see. Road signs, street names, menus, posters for shows, and things like that. This will get you in the habit of recognizing common ways of putting things. And listen to people around you as well. Yeah, eavesdrop. Be very, very nosy. It might sound funny, but as long as you're being respectful, you can learn a lot from people's conversations. I remember traveling, I would always travel by bus. And I would just listen closely to the conversations going on next to me. And I would learn so much from that. Just the way that people carry themselves, how the locals express themselves, what kind of little interjections they use, different ways to say the same thing. I would sort of sit there and kind of imitate what I was hearing. Even if I didn't understand it, I'd just imitate the cadence of it. And definitely practice asking someone to repeat and explain more slowly. That specific line, could you repeat that please? Learn that line in the language that you're going to need because you're going to be using that one a lot. If you memorize these things before you need them, you will feel a lot more confident.
Or I cannot speak in the first place. How can I speak more if I cannot even speak a little? I'm afraid of speaking. The key here is that you don't talk to a person. You talk to yourself for 5 minutes every day or every time you practice your Russian.
Okay, are you listening? You cannot skip the speaking practice. You need as much speaking practice as possible before the big day so that you won't be scared, which can be hard if you're leaving soon and you're working full time at the same time. Right, now this is important. Learning stuff from a textbook and actually practicing saying it are two very different things. You can't skip the speaking part. If you just spend a little bit of time taking the stuff that you've learned and actually practice verbalizing it, articulating it, get it out of your mouth, it's going to make you so much more confident when the big day arrives and you step off that plane. Now, this could be tricky if you are leaving soon and you're busy at work. So the two most efficient things you can do is spend 5 minutes every day speaking to yourself. Every day, just say whatever. You parrot the phrases you've been learning from your book. Just get comfortable talking about your own life.
About yourself, who you are, your interests, or maybe your habits, what you did this morning, what you're doing right now, what your plans are for the future. Как прошел твой день? If you answer the same question for a month, just to yourself, by yourself, for 30 times, you answer how your day went. When I then come up to you and ask you that again, you've practiced this 30 times.
Then go on a tutoring site where you can book a few sessions to practice speaking with native speaker teachers. It sounds scary, but teachers are used to speaking with complete beginners and they can help you. Book 10 sessions, for example. It's really, really easy, and you can go to a site like LanguaTalk, for example, link in the description. That's my favorite place to go for that. They're very, very chilled teachers, and you can ask them to help you practice specific scenarios, do role plays. Again, you can try and personalize it. Tell them the kind of things you're going to be doing, and they will just help you practice saying things in a safe environment. And if you're going somewhere like Japan or China, well,
我 我
喜欢
喜欢喜欢
吃
吃
苹果。
苹果。
Let's just say somehow you managed to learn every single word in the Mandarin phrasebook. If you are totally butchering the tone and the pronunciation, well, they're not going to have a clue what you're on about. So you've got to practice speaking with a real person. And if you need a budget option, there's always Language Exchange, which is free. LanguaTalk is good. Just pick up the free option and go for it. Whatever you choose, speaking practice is going to help you not freeze up when you get on the streets of Beijing or Moscow or wherever it is that you're going. Let us know in the comments, by the way, what trips you have coming up. I'd love to see. And by the way, if you think that that app that you've been messing around with on your phone is giving you enough of that speaking practice, well, keep watching, there's something you need to see. Now, back in my traveling days, I would take a little notebook with me everywhere and I would write down absolutely everything that I would come across. I would make it a point to, every time I saw something that was interesting, that caught my attention, a word that someone said, I would write it down. And it was all part of this habit of trying to personalize the language, not just to be a kind of passive tourist, but to try and engage with it and say, when I hear a word I like, I'm gonna write it down because that makes it personal to me and I'm then more likely to remember it and I can practice it. Everything would go into my notebook. These days, most things go onto the Notes app in my phone, to be honest, but get into the habit of doing that.
But as a foreigner, if you say Jambo to the locals, they will respond Jambo, but they will know you are a foreigner or you've just never stayed in Kenya or Tanzania long enough to understand that the locals never use that word at all.
Yeah, I will say this again. Locals are highly likely to use expressions that you've never heard before that are not in your textbook. Not even in the best, like, speak like a local books. You're going to hear new things. If you want to blend in, capture those moments. It's also worth scribbling down the written versions of any essential things you want or need for daily life, especially if they're quite specific, right? It can be really hard to find cheese in Thailand or big shoes in Japan, for example. And if there's an emergency or you're about to miss your ride home, you don't really want to be sifting through a 400-page phrase book. So I would always carry around a list of words and phrases that I wanted to practice using or that I thought I was going to need. Like, is this the last train out of Tokyo, for example, when I was quite a few beers in and I was in danger of not being able to get my train home? That's a story for another day. So have lines like this in your notebook along with details of your accommodation, where you're staying, and practice asking in case you get lost. Little things like this make all the difference, but we'll save that for the next chapter. My biggest hack of all with this notebook is to get native speakers to write things down for you. This is one of my favorite tricks. Say somebody greets you in a way you've never heard before, so it's a completely new phrase. Rather than just zoning out, instead say to them, can you write that down in my book for me? This is why it's a little bit better than a phone. Like, handing someone your phone is a bit weird, but if you've got a notebook, you can ask them to write it down. Say, I want to learn to say that, or anything else that you want to know. Most people will love being asked to write down a phrase or two. Just be mindful of how you word your questions.
You want this process to be as intuitive as possible, so they just know what you're asking for. So in the case of Japanese, if I were to ask someone, how would you say this in a natural way to your friend, right? Well, immediately then, we have shaved off all the other layers. We're not going to be using keigo. We're not going to be using this sort of formal way of speaking.
That's a good tip from Robin. And watch that book fill up so fast. The really cool part is that it will become a nice little memory keeper of your journey as well.
You can barter with people in the market, and they will assume that if you're learning a little bit of the language, then you also probably know what things should cost, and that can help you to avoid being ripped off in a lot of situations. Same goes with taxi drivers. They may overcharge you if they know that they can get away with it.
Before you go, look around your place and ask yourself, what are the things I need every day? What kind of scenarios could I find myself in? What would I say in that situation, especially a tricky situation? Now go learn the best words for that. Write them in your notebook. Remember that notebook that you got? Yeah, get it warmed up, write it down. Say you find yourself getting harassed by a bunch of street vendors, and let's face it, in certain places you travel, people will harass you. But if you can calmly smile and say, not today, thank you, using the exact words that they would have used, then you not only get instant street cred, but they'll probably leave you alone because you sound like you'd lived there or you're not a complete clueless tourist. Practice for any unusual situations that worry you. How you're going to place your very particular fussy food orders, for example. What you'll say if you get lost in a dodgy neighborhood. Practice the exact words and how the scene might play out. I know this sounds extreme, but again, it's the difference between being really passive and being really active and taking and interest. You can practice anything that you want. This is your life. Requests, excuses, explanations, whatever you think you'll need. And here is a fun tip to go along with this. If there's a phrase you keep forgetting how to say, record yourself saying it on your phone, and then when you're in the situation you can't remember, go stand where no one can hear and just play it to yourself just before you have to say it. You might feel like a parrot, but a parrot gets the words right. Making friends you can hang out with is by far the quickest way to get speaking more confidently. You don't need a whole crowd, just a couple of people who like your company. You're not trying to force anything. This is all very spontaneous. Just find people who are doing things you enjoy. Maybe there's a group going to all the festivals or doing weekend adventure trips or playing beach volleyball, wine tasting. I don't know. Make native friends and let them teach you phrases. When I was in Brazil, I spent all my time around local musicians and I ended up playing music in the most incredible scenarios, and it was from that environment, through that shared interest, that I ended up learning a lot of Portuguese. And you'll be amazed how good you can get at the language by actually doing something else in common.
Eu não sou o tipo de pessoa assim de começar a falar com todo mundo, mas não sei, num mercado, numa loja, em algum lugar onde dá para conversar, né? É bastante fácil assim.
Point is, you want to get over your initial terror of actually speaking the language out loud in a real situation. So even the guy behind the bar in your hotel is good for a daily chat. Just ask him to skip the English.
How do you say one small fry?
Una pequeña papa.
Una pequeña papa frita. How you say please again? ¿Por qué? Por favor. Una pequeña papa frita. Please, ¿por qué? Por favor.
Picture the scene. You've practiced saying this exact phrase out loud 5 times, but now you're sitting here and saying it and they have no idea what you're saying. And because that's all you learned, you don't know how to rephrase and say something else. So what happens next? Confusion ensues. And honestly, sometimes people might be a bit rude, which can throw you off your game and you get a bit flustered. So you end up forgetting everything you learned. It happens. What are you going to do? Run for the door?
Bonjour, vous avez choisi? Pour moi, le vent blanc. Un vent blond. Le vent blanc. Le vent rouge. Le vent blanc. Ah, un vin blanc.
Listen, not everyone is great at understanding your accent. Some people are not used to talking to foreigners. Some people are just going to completely misunderstand what you say. But you can be ready for this, and here's the trick. Strip it back. You don't always need to speak in full sentences. The rest of the world doesn't. After all, I'll tell you, some of the people around where I live, I'm not sure I've ever heard them say a full sentence. Sometimes less is more. Say you're buying something. How many words do you really need to get that thing bought? What are you trying to communicate? Just stick to the basics and you'll get the message across. How much? 55 euros. Thank you. It gets the job done. You don't need to speak in these long, beautiful phrases. I think part of what's important about getting comfortable speaking foreign languages when you travel is accepting that you're not going to be perfect and you're going to be beautifully eloquent when you speak, but it's that communication is really all that matters. Tell you a secret, the reason that I learn languages is not because I have a deep love for the language itself, but it's because I have a deep love for communicating to other people, and communication can happen with just a few words. It's also easier, right? Fewer words, there's fewer words to pronounce. So you've got this. No more awkward tourist stuff here. Real heart to heart. It helps a ton to also watch what others are doing. Observe how people call over the waiter, how they apologize, and just do what they do. Observe. Keep it simple, be nice. The native speaker might actually be nervous about you.
Il y a des centaines et des centaines d'années, il y a eu une période de l'histoire connue sous le nom d'âge viking. Les Vikings vivaient dans le nord d'Europe. Leur terre était très froide et peu fertile.
Now, if you're not a total beginner and you understand the very basics of a language, here is a fun way to keep your head out of English. Carry a book of short stories in your day pack. They're typically small books like ours here are pretty small. You can fit in your bag, and you can let this be your go-to reading material wherever you're relaxing or on the train, on the bus, whatever. Something really simple is perfect, especially if it comes with audio that you can also be listening to. I have students who never travel without one of these books, which is great because it's a way to keep your mind engaged in the language instead of just switching to English or watching the news on YouTube or whatever when you're on the bus. Or if you want something a little bit more conversational, we have these books of 101 conversations. We have a bunch of languages, beginner and intermediate. These are not short stories, they're much more conversational. So you open it up and you just got lines of dialogue, so it's much more spoken language. That might be easier for you if you get a bit intimidated by lots of text.
I found quite a few Swedish words that were new to me because they're very specific to their field, like rolling pin or nappy change. Now, you might see that as a bad thing if you're a beginner, but there are millions of apps and things for learning beginner language, whereas there are not so many to teach you words like this.
Now, I do not typically advocate for the use of apps. Long-time viewers will know this. It's not because there's anything inherently wrong with apps, it's just because A, they're usually not very good, and B, anything that's on your phone is just one big distraction machine. However, if you just want some practice saying things, then a flashcard app can be really good when your trip is just around the corner. Flashcard apps are just like paper flashcards, except you input them into your phone and then you carry them around with you wherever you go. But you've got to make sure you make the flashcard app work for you. So you do all the speaking bits out loud. Don't just sit there mindlessly tapping. Get your mouth used to pronouncing the word, because that's how you'll gain that confidence. And for the love of all things good, please only focus on natural language.
I give birth to my child. I don't love you. I only love mayonnaise. My dog is unemployed and only has one eye.
There are cases of language apps using really silly dialogues because somehow they think that weird phrases are memorable or something. But to me, that is about as helpful as a snake in my boot.
I get it. There's a snake in my boot.
Another app that's just very practical to have on your phone when you're traveling is a translation app. Google Translate is usually the simplest. A tip here is to actually download the dictionary of the language that you're going to be using in the app, so that if you don't have data for whatever reason, then you can access it everywhere. That's going to help you look up translations for words when you need them. You can also sometimes actually get your phone and scan something and it will translate it for you. It can be really, really useful. Just don't rely on it. But what if you're not just trying to survive? What if you want to learn a language more effectively so you can actually get fluent and extend your trip into language adventure? Well, that's a different story altogether, but luckily for you, the answers are all in this video right here. Fluency. It's a really cool thing.